British era to entry tax on the imports, then to specific commodity-wise tax on sugar, salt, motor spirits, tobacco, then to sales tax, then to VAT, and now to GST. According to a survey, 77% of CFO think that GST had a favorable impact on the economy. Another 57 of them, they say they are now willing to take risk in their businesses as the future would be about making gains owing to these reforms. World Bank has pointed out that Indian GST system is globally speaking the toughest, with not just the highest tax slab rates, but also the country with the most number of tax slabs. About 49 countries in the world are having just one slab, and about 28 countries are having two slabs. France was the first with the implementation of GST in 1954, Germany in 1968, UK in 1973, and Japan in 1989, and India in 2017. Due to the reforms the Indian government is showing and implementing, India is on the path of progress. Worldwide, many of them feel that India will be a center of the economic power. India has collected the highest GST of about 1.20 lakh crores in January 21. And transactions wise, in India, the highest returns were filed, 23.86 lakhs returns were filed in a day. Payment wise, 9.55 taxpayers has made the payment, and registration wise about 1.23 crores are registered. Every year, the finance minister brings into the reforms and the amendments in Act, and all this leads us to the issues, and we are here today to learn the intricacies on this issue. RRC committee had aptly informed us, all the participants, to write down the issues, and many of us have written it. And so we have with us the panel speakers, young and dynamic Advocate Bharat Raichandani and CS Akarsha, who with their knowledge and expertise will resolve all these issues and throw light on it. It is said, ignorance is darkness and knowledge is light. They are here to spread the light, to remove the ignorance from our minds. GST has made some people cry and some people laugh. The pessimist always cries, but an opportunist always laughs and finds growth and uses his knowledge to solve the issues. મિત્રો, જીવનમાં સુખી થવું હોય તો હસવું અને હસાવવું. બાકી રોયેલા તો હંમેશા પ્રોબ્લેમનો હિસાબ રાખે છે. અને હિસાબની વાત પર આવીએ તો ઘણી બધી ઓપોર્ચ્યુનિટીઝ આપણને મળે છે રોજે રોજ. કોઈક એનો સરવાળો કરે છે, કોઈ બાદબાકી કરે છે, કોઈ ભાગાકાર કરે છે, કોઈ ગુણાકાર કરે છે. પરંતુ ઈશ્વર જ એક છે જે સૌનો હિસાબ બરોબર કરે છે. થેન્ક યુ. As I said, basically the panel speakers over here. Now I request CA Mehul Dara to introduce both the panel speakers and our moderator, CA Jayesh Gopi.
Thank you, Rajiv. It is indeed an honor to introduce the panelists and the moderator for today's final session on panel discussion on GST. To start with, let me first introduce the first panelist, Advocate Bharat Raichandani. He is a managing partner of UBR Legal Advocates, a law firm based in Mumbai, New Delhi and Vapi. He has over 17 years of experience in arguing matters before Supreme Court and various high courts, and has successfully argued more than 1,000 cases before CSTAT, VAT Tribunal, Textile Committee, Cess Tribunal, Appellate Tribunal, and Income Tax Appellate Tribunal. His area of expertise includes GST, service tax, central excise, customs, VAT, works contract and octroi. He has been recently awarded Young Achievers Under 40 Legal Award by Legal Era Awards. He is a university gold medalist at law for all the 3 years. He was associated with Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan attorneys at Mumbai for over 9 years. He has authored various books and published various articles on GST and has addressed various seminars organized by major industry associations such as CII, IMC, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Chambers of Commerce and Industries, BCAs, to name a few. With this brief introduction, I request you all to welcome today's panelist, Advocate Bharat. Now coming to introduction of the second panelist, C.A. Sagar Shah. Sagar is partner in Ernst & Young with over 20 years of professional experience, and he oversees Pune and Gujarat practice for indirect tax. He has written and presented various papers on topics of professional interest before various professional bodies such as FICCI, CII, ASSOCHAM, ICAI, to name a few. His subjects of special interest are technology, automobile, real estate, SEZ, and EOUs. He is a member of Permanent Trade Committee of Customs. He is a special invitee of the Indirect Tax Committee of ICAI. He is a core group member of Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. With this brief introduction, I request you all to welcome the second panelist. Now friends, let me introduce you to our panel moderator for today's panel discussion, C. Jayesh Gogri. Jayesh Bhai has been practicing for more than 2 decades and specializes in the area of GST, custom, foreign trade policy and other indirect taxes. Currently, he is practicing as Director of GST in Time Services Private Limited and provides services of consultancy, litigation, training, audits and reviews, compliance guidance, and setting up systems and controls to various corporates. He is a regular contributor to BCA's journal for the topic of service tax and GST judgments. He is a contributor to background material on GST, background material on customs and foreign trade policy, and study material on GST for students published by ICAI. He is the author and co-authored various books published by BCAs and other associations. He has given lectures at various public forums organized by IIM, ICAI, CBIC, ICSI, and other trade and professional associations. He is a special invitee of Indirect Tax Committee of ICAI and also a member of Indirect Tax Committee of Bombay Chartered Accountants Society. Jayesh Bhai has contributed not only to professional fund, but he is also a regular social contributor. He is a core committee member of Jain Youth Forum and delivers talks on Jainism and self-development. With this brief introduction, I request you all to welcome today's panel moderator.
Before we hand over the floor to the panelists and the moderator, we would like, as a token of our love and affection, to present a memento to the panelists and the moderator. I would call upon C.A. Hiren Shah to present a memento to Sri Advocate Bharat Raichanda. I would request C.A. Ramesh Shera to present the memento to C.A. Sagar Shah. I would call upon C.A. Vinit Khera to present the memento to moderator C.A. Jayesh Gogri. As in the booklet, basically the issues are already printed, and C.A. Jayesh Gogri will be taking up the one by one, and Advocate Bharat Bhai and C.A. Sagar will be responding to their issues, and I am sure basically we will be enlightened with their talks.
जरूरी है सर, इसको अंदर कर देंगे।
नहीं नहीं अरे भरत भाई फिर अंदर सब डिस्कस करेंगे यही
Yesterday you read Times of India, they filed an FIR against lady. Left the home, she FIR was filed. पुलिस को कोई काम धंधा नहीं है, जेम्स को कोई काम धंधा नहीं है। No, that's right. Otherwise you stand there. No problem.
Yeah, good morning, friends. In fact, after coming over here, me and Bharat were discussing that we missed yesterday evening. It was better like to come yesterday evening rather than coming today morning. So such a pleasant environment, and sorry to keep you blocked here instead of like allowing to enjoy the nature. So let's enjoy some, I would say, intricacies. Of course, you would have enjoyed a lot of things of the nature. Let's enjoy some of the things pertaining to GST. And we have got here the one advocate, the another CA, and we know the flavor of normally these two fraternities, right? The advocate says like, okay, everything is fightable, everything is your right. CA says, no, be cautious, okay? So the blend probably will enjoy that blend that, okay, there will be Bharat Bhai ka flavor, that this is something not doable, this is wrong, and Sagar would be saying probably, I'm not sure, Sagar. हाँ कि भाई संभल के चलो ऐसा like you can take this kind of steps etc. So in inner side is that both of them are my friends. So कुछ मतलब planned है यहाँ पर fixed है. And my son was asking what is the role of moderator. मैंने बोला टांग अड़ाने का because two luminaries are there to share their knowledge. Whatever I don't know, I'll ask them. If I know something, I'll poke my nose. So with this note, let us start with the first question. We are already late by not less than 39 minutes. So let's rush up. The first question is to Bharat Bhai. The principle of mutuality, which was earlier there, and there were like a number of court judgments saying that as far as the income tax is concerned, there is no worry. There is a concept of mutuality and there is no taxability, there is no surplus, there is no profit. In fact, whatever is there is surplus, not liable to be taxed. Some similar concept was even rendered applicable to the sales tax laws as early as in 1917, Young Men's Association Club, etc. And then recently, Kolkata High Court Club, Kolkata Club, the Supreme Court gave a verdict that yes, this is the concept also applicable to your service tax laws or indirect tax laws. Now there is a proposed amendment in this budget that they want to do away with that kind of proposition. So they are trying to do two things. First of all, they are trying to insert a clause AA in section 7 stating that there will be a supply. It will be regarded as a supply if there is any transaction or any activity by a member or constituent to the society or the association, or the association rendering some activity or transaction to doing some transaction with the member. Now the question is, what will happen to all this history which was there for income tax? Yes, probably there is no change in the income tax law, but with regard to your indirect tax laws, there were like many people self-redevelopment in construction industry, or like society charging maintenance. Many people would have taken a stand, not liable to GST. So the question is, Bharat Bhai, to you, what will happen to all these stands, specifically with a point that this amendment is retrospective from 1st July 2017. So your views, please.
Thanks, Jay. Very good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Before I say anything, this is not for this particular question, but all the questions that I am going to answer is, I may have a view, I may have an opinion, okay. Not necessarily you have to agree with it, okay. If you disagree, keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. There is no problem. You can disagree. Okay. Because these are points where there will be two views. Clearly. Absolutely, clearly, all these questions can have two views. This way or that way. Okay. Ultimately, it is neither your view nor my view. Ultimately, Supreme Court's view. Okay. The unfortunate part is, wherever Supreme Court takes a view, they come out with these kind of amendments. Okay. Though they promise that we will not bring any retrospective amendment, okay. They are all politicians. Don't go by their word. They have got this retrospective amendment right from 2017. Now they have got an amendment in the charging section itself. This can happen only in our country. Okay. लॉ को आके 2 साल नहीं हुए, उसमें चार्जिंग सेक्शन में 4 अमेंडमेंट कर दिए. Okay. Poor drafting. Clearly. 1, 2, not accepting that we are not good at drafting. 2 reasons. Be that as it may, I am not here to criticize anybody. We, all of us are part of the same. Okay. It's not they or we. All of us. The question here is whether this amendment is valid or no, because it is retrospective. Please note the government has power to retrospectively legislate. The government has power to retrospectively legislate. Therefore, if you want to challenge the particular provision on the retrospectivity alone, I do not think that challenge will sustain. That is 1. 2, what they have done is they have amended section 7 saying that transactions or activities between person and its members or constituents will be a supplier, and they have added an explanation to that. This can happen only in our country. That section is not clear. I am adding an explanation to the section 9 right now. Explanation generally comes later to clarify what the section wanted to cover. But they are saying in the explanation that you will be treated as separate persons. And there is a deeming fiction in that. There is a deeming fiction in that. Deeming fiction again is a very powerful tool in the hands of the legislature where they can deem something. What is a deeming fiction? What is a deeming fiction? A deeming fiction is something which is not real, which is not actual. But the legislature says, please assume it to be so. Please assume it to be so and let all logical consequences thereof flow, assuming this to be true. Okay. This deeming fiction, I'll just tell you, I'll just take half a second, sorry. Okay. We lawyers are known for digressing. Okay. There is a reported UK VAT judgment. If you see, there is a UK District Court judgment. Okay. A lady, madam, don't hit me or hate me, please. Okay. Lady was driving a car. Okay. And she hit the pole. Okay. This officer made a ticket and she was produced before the magistrate. Okay. The counsel for the lady argued, my lords, the section says no man of ordinary prudence can ever drive like this. There is no woman of ordinary prudence. And the judge agreed. She was acquitted. Judge agreed and she was acquitted. Next day they made an amendment, man deems woman. Okay. So deeming fiction is another powerful tool in the hands of legislature. So therefore please note, in this particular amendment they have used all 3 tools at their disposal to overcome judgment of the Supreme Court of the larger bench in Calcutta Club case. 1, they have used retrospectivity. 2, they have used deeming fiction. 3, if you see the explanation, it says notwithstanding anything contained in any other law or judgment or decree of the court, etc. Okay. We don't care about those judgments. Now we say this is the law. Okay. How far the section is valid? Okay. That section needs to be challenged. How far it is valid, that the court will decide. But let us assume, because everybody cannot go to court. Everybody cannot go to court. Let us assume the section is valid. Assuming that the section is valid and valid from 2017, I proceed to answer Jayesh Bhai's query is, still whether cooperative housing societies, as Jayesh Bhai pointed out, will be liable to tax? According to me, the answer is still no. An emphatic no. You will still not be liable to pay tax despite this amendment. Okay. In case of self-development also, the answer is no. Okay. Assuming that the section is valid. Okay. I am not saying that the section is valid, but even if you assume, the answer is no.
So what would be the basis of saying no, sir? I mean,
no, sir, that is free, that is not free, sir.
No, consideration here, sir.
No, I'll tell you, sir. Okay. The reason is this, sir. There are twofold answers for this. There is a twofold reason for this. Number one is, if you see the section of supply 7.1, it says in the course of furtherance of business. That has not been done away with. Please note, that has not been done away with. Okay. Societies do not have any business. Okay. They are not, these activities are not in the course of furtherance of business, therefore you are not otherwise liable, number one. Number two, even otherwise, please note, they have not done away with supply. There has to be a supply, that is the first and primary, first most condition which says supply. Somebody may say, no, sir, you are mistaken, because clause AA, correct, AA, na? A, B, B, Z, Z tak aa jate hain. Okay. The clause AA says that activities or transactions between this person and member. Okay. Therefore, first there has to be an activity. There has to be a transaction. What is that activity? What is that transaction? According to me, there is no activity, there is no transaction by a society to its member. 1, 2, for cash. Please note, here the section talks about cash, deferred payment or other valuable consideration. Judgment of Supreme Court in Gopal Das Devidas will apply, where cash, deferred payment or valuable consideration or other valuable consideration, it has to be a consideration. Read with 231. The maintenance that you pay is not a consideration. Please note, it is a part of your contribution. It is not a consideration. Therefore, still, according to me, there is no supply because they don't meet the requirements of 7.1a. They have not done away with that. And therefore, even after this amendment, you will not be liable to pay tax under GST.
Thank you, sir, for supplying inputs without consideration. Next question is to Sagar Bhai. Is interest payable on reversal of ITC, which was wrongly claimed, maybe by mistake or whatever, and it was never utilized so far. So balance was always lying in my account, but then later on I realized and I reversed it. Will there be any interest implication? And subsequent to that, like there is another connected question, we'll discuss that later.
Okay, thank you, Jayesh. And just to, before I start, Bharat said something I have to say, and I'm only following what Bharat said. I was very surprised to hear a disclaimer from an advocate. Normally that's what CAs do, but very surprising and very happy that you did it. So I think we should make it equally applicable. So I actually registered saying something on the first question, so I'll leave it to do it later with Bharat.
So it happened. Sorry. Actually, it happened. Justice Shivraj Patil, he was chief. Justice Shivraj Patil in open court, somebody came. Must be disgruntled, poor man, poor soul. You cannot blame anybody. Okay. Sorry. ऐसे ही सुनाई देता ना सर? हम लोग तो कोच चिल्लाते. Okay. So Justice Shivraj Patil, somebody, the Supreme Court hire करके he threw a chappal at Justice Shivraj Patil. So brother got very angry. What is this Supreme Court? Justice Shivraj Patil told him, brother, you must be a disgruntled soul. You never know what mistake we must have committed. Okay. He called his sipahi and said, "Usko chappal निकाल के उसको दे दो. Let not any man walk out barefoot from my court. Let him go." What class? What class? Same thing happened. I will not name the other judge. Okay. Same thing happened with other judge. Okay. That man was issued with contempt notice. Okay. So it is possible. So it is possible to have different views.
We are not litigants, sir. We are fellow members.
So
Next time से लोग परमिट नहीं करेंगे लोगों को चप्पल के साथ आने के लिए.
No, smartly what Bharat did is he gave both the examples. पहला वाला judge, दूसरा वाला judge. You don't know where he is. Okay, here we go. I think interesting question, and I think right from Senmat trade times, we always had this issue in swift judgment, Supreme Court, and so on and so forth. So typically, what happens is that, and this is a very normal thing that even in GST, and I have seen more in GST where we have ended up willing credit, whatever dispute, whatever issue you wanted to take it to APR reconciliation issues. and for whatever reasons you have availed the credit, you have balance in your credit ledger ECL which is there. And now the question has come to say you have availed incorrect credit and hence pay interest. And this is a typical thing which is always being picked up by the department. I think the good thing which happened September last year was to make an amendment to say that if you have availed credit but not utilized, then there should not be any interest. The interest will be applicable only to the extent of whatever you are utilizing from the cash ledger. The issue obviously was to say from what date will this be applicable. And this budget, I think they have proposed a retrospective amendment to say right from July 17, this provision will apply, and right from 1st July 17, you will not be required to pay interest. If credit is purely availed and you have a balance and you go to reverse out of that and you are not going to utilize. I think that is sensible in terms of what it is. Lot of representations were made on this issue since a long time, and I think it's falling in place in terms of what it is. I think to that extent, we are safe from getting into too many technical legal debates, other than the fact to say that if today you have a notice for the earlier period, what happens till the time this provision is, you get a presidential assent and it becomes a part of the law.
Sir, here typically, this question also came from a CA, for like company consultation, and the specific question which he was saying was the language of the section. I'll just read out the 51. So it says like shall be for the period for which the text or part thereof remains unpaid. That's fine. Then there is a proviso which takes care of this angle. Now typically the proviso reads, it says provided that the interest on tax payable in respect of supplies made during the tax period and declared in the return for the said period furnished after the due date, the interest will be applicable only on the portion of cash ledger. I have filed my return in time. There was a balance lying in my credit ledger or whatever cash ledger, and if say for example I realize later on I reverse it, then this proviso is not taking care of that because the return was filed in time. It was not after due date.
So I think you'll have to look at the intention. If you see what it is wanting to do, Jayesh, is that obviously you came to know that the error that you have created is after you have filed the return, which means the correction that you are doing is after the filing of the return, which was for the period. So say for example, you availed the incorrect credit by mistake in the month of September of 20, which is there. Now today you have come to know. So to that extent you are amending in the return for this month. So in the 3B that you filed for this month, that is where you want to do the correction. Which means you are doing the amendment for a return in this period, which is for a period beyond the due date which is there. And hence you still fit into the proviso.
And since there is no
and I think this is fairly drafted. I don't see really challenge in terms of interpretation because you're trying to not relate to, you're going to see today's return. If you see in GST what happens, the return that you're filing today is this month's return that you will file and amending the mistake that you made for something which happened 6 months back or whatever time. So which is that I think it is fair to interpret. I think it's a beneficial provision. Let's interpret it beneficially. And I think that is also sensible in terms of what it is. And I don't really see this should really become a bone of contention in future at least. Let me just point one more thing. If you see what happens, and this is what I've seen recently in a DGCI matter, is that they start with to say, if you read section 73 and 74, so the sections which are there to invoke show cause notices which are there. Section 74 for instance says that no show cause notice to be issued if the tax along with the interest thereon has been paid as per the section 51. Now the interpretation interestingly DGCI is taking it to say, look, it still talks of interest to be paid as per section 51. Now the point is that this amendment has happened in 51, which means yes, there is an interest which is zero. So to that extent I have paid my interest which is there so as to say, and hence there should not be a show cause notice. So just keeping in mind that this is still never ending from department for tail right.
And I agree, Sagar, that like yes, there is first of all there is no revised return. So only by of like in your current return only you can amend it. And secondly, even like the GST Council minutes etc. express the same way what you expressed that ultimately it is the intention never to levy interest this kind of thing. So interesting provision. And the next question also connected to that angle itself, that you had money lying in cash ledger, but you could not file your return. And the provision says that unless you file your return, the money which is in cash ledger doesn't get utilized, and therefore it is merely lying as a balance You have not paid taxes unless you have filed your return. So with regard to that, do you have some additional comments?
No, I think it is, finally you have to go by the intent and referring to GST Council, refer to whatever judgments we are talking of. Finally, the intent is to say that if you, whether it's an electronic credit ledger or cash ledger, the fact of the matter is that if you are having tax which is there in advance, which is there being deposited, where is the question of now you getting to deal with? So I think even if this gets picked up, this becomes an issue of debate. I think no courts will ever interpret otherwise. I think we are equally very safe on this provision at least.
But any comments on PLA? Because since excise is, this concept is there of electronic cash ledger.
I agree with what Sagar is saying. Absolutely, there should not be a problem. In fact, according to me, okay, subject to correction, the amendment, the proviso and retrospectivity of the proviso was not required, is not needed. It's a useless benefit being granted which is otherwise covered by the section, because if you see section 51, it talks about tax unpaid. Unpaid means something which is not paid. Your input tax credit is already tax paid to the government, only adjustment is pending. Unpaid means tax paid, unpaid in cash. So proviso is not saying nothing but what the section earlier also said. So I agree with Sagar, there should not be a problem in either situation because this is also their intention.
And I'm sure there will be some judgments pertaining to excise laws saying.
In fact, the INSWIFT judgment, the Supreme Court judgment where the entire issue started for the first time. That issue, why the Supreme Court said that interest has to be paid, because it was the issue of fake invoices. Where in that case, what was brought on record to say that the assessee, the taxpayer had fake invoices, basically they had availed the credit. And that's why I think to that extent the court would have probably be colored their mind to say that, okay, you're talking about fake invoices, then we want to levy penalty. So that was the background. Because even after that also there have been cases after that where INSWIFT was successfully being distinguished. So that is why even in Sunvat, and they brought in amendment in Sunvat also. Unfortunately in GST for the first time they did not do what they did for Sunvat, and we had to get this the amendment. That's the history.
Right, about the taxes which are paid like you discussed. Now there is a case where like I've paid taxes, but by whatever means, like it was supposed to be paid as IGST, but I considered that as a CGST. Later on, 2 years later on, when the CA came, he carried out that 9C activity, and then he pointed out that okay, there is a mistake. You have paid taxes, fine, but you should have paid IGST, not C plus S. Okay. Now I am ready to rectify my mistake. I am ready to pay IGST. But what about that C and S refund? Because 2 years which are being talked about in section 54, they are already over. So will I be hit by a time bar?
Okay, this question emanates, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because 54 refers to 77.
Yes, sir.
That's the reason, because 54 refers to 77. 77 says if there is a mistake, you please correct it. According to me, that section is not required. According to me, that section is a benevolent provision, not required. It is otherwise assumed in the law. Okay, for the reason that I cannot pay you tax twice. I cannot pay you tax twice. It is a matter of internal adjustment between you, whether you pay IGST or CGST. It's a matter of internal adjustment between the state and the center. The assessee is not concerned with that. Assessee is really not concerned with that. Assessee has to pay tax. Therefore, I am not required to pay tax to you twice. That will be contrary to Article 265 of the Constitution. No tax can be collected without authority of law. Okay. Now, rightly or wrongly, this person has paid and claimed refund. Now, the question of time limit will arise. According to me, the time limit will start from the day he pays the tax. Again, please note, the time limit should start from the day he pays the tax again. He has already paid the tax. If they say that is not tax because wrongly paid CGST or SGST or whatever, okay, then it was not tax, it was a deposit. You have paid tax today. Therefore, a refund will, relevant date, if at all, according to me, 54 time limit will not apply. But even if it has to apply, the relevant date will be from the day you pay the tax. Okay. Earlier also under 11B these issues were there. Okay. The Bombay High Court took a view where I argued one matter in case of, I forget that my party's name. Please pardon me, I don't remember party names. I remember only judges' names. That's how I have trained my mind. Okay, Justice Gangapur Wala's judgment is there, beautiful judgment in in-house productions. Okay, there the judge took a view that the relevant date will be from the date of your knowledge that you have committed this mistake. So the date of your knowledge of realizing the mistake is a relevant date. From that date, it should be within 1 year. At that time, it was 1 year. Today, it is 2 years. Okay, that was followed by Justice Abhayog in Giriraj Constructions. Okay, the two judgments are there where they say it is not taxed at that relevant time. According to me, time bar will not apply. Even otherwise, if you see, the board had issued a circular under the erstwhile excise law and service tax law, where parties used to make a mistake. Earlier there was code, no? 0044 is service tax code, 0036 is excise code, 0039 is interest code, some code, sir, I don't know numbers and all. Okay, they said instead of this you paid here. Officer used to say, forget, claim refund for that, pay this. Board said nothing doing. You write a letter to the pay and accounts officer and adjust it. And the tribunal in Pepsi's matter took a view that you are not required to pay tax again once you have already paid the tax. So according to me, if such a situation arises, please don't pay it again. Because claiming refund is another task. Okay. So don't pay tax, but if you have paid, time limit will not apply.
In fact, just to add to what Bharat said, and I think this is a very good point to say, if you read section 77 of the CGST or 19 of IGST, and which are at parametry in terms of what it is, the subclause 2 says that no interest would be payable. So say for instance, you have paid CNS and you have to pay I. Even if you delay by how many over years and whatever department wants to demand, there is never going to be any interest. Forget any other dispute in relation to that. So why in the first case pay something which you later on want to fight out to get a refund? Just to add again, and why I am saying so is that the litigation which will start on the relevant date, because the definition of relevant date still talks of the date of payment of duty and will fall under residuary. Although you will want to argue to say you take the date when it came to your knowledge and the second time when you make the payment, the refund that you are applying is for the tax that you paid on the first date. So this is going to be the dispute which is there, and what Bharat was saying, and Bombay High Court, and again we start from Afatla and we look at all that which is there. I think historically it is fair to say that when it is not a tax, you always the time limit does not apply. But there are also, and why I am telling you this, there are also judgment which says that this will apply only to cases where you can say that this is not a tax. So if this was a tax, so again what is being paid by a mistake under a law, to say that it was a tax, it was not a tax and you have paid it, and then no time limit applies, but it was a tax payable and you have paid it by mistake, then it will still apply. So there is a very subtle distinction between what we are trying to say, what it is, and that is why when such things happen, it is in your interest to say, look, I have done this is something for the state and central government to address. Even of IGST, there is a proportion which goes to the state. Please do it at that time. Whatever letter you want from my side, you take, but I am not going to pay the tax. That will be a better way to look at this.
So Sagar, please hold on. Just 1 moment. Like one connected question to this. Since you are a CA, you would be certifying 9C. So how would you consider this kind of situation of your client? Like, would you be reporting somewhere that okay, this should have been paid or not paid?
So first of all, I am a CA, but I don't hold a COP.
Would you advise CAs?
Second, this is the last year that we are all going to certify those who are going to. So from next year, it's going to be the clients who are going to certify. So be happy about that part. I don't think there is nothing to worry. The clients are still going to come to you for at least doing the reconciliation statement. My view is that if you see a section, what you are certifying is only annual reconciliation statement. You are not certifying any position of the client. So tomorrow probably if you take this argument that I have to certify this, you are also going to say that if the incorrect ITC claim, are you certifying that? You are not. If there are whatever incorrect classification, are you certifying that? My answer is no. Look at the provision. It is clearly about what you are certifying the reconciliation statement, which starts from your financials, which is state-wise, which are there, and to the GST return. In my view, I don't think really that this is a cause of concern for us. I hope Bharat has nothing to say on this. The CA arena totally.
Do you want to add something to it?
Yes, totally.
No, I mentioned that's why I instigated it.
According to me, please note, you are not certifying anything. You are not giving any character certificate to any client. Please note. You cannot give. I cannot give character certificate to my wife also. Please note, okay, people who are after your life, you tell them to get out of your houses and your offices. They are trying to arrest CAs, etc., and whatever frauds they are claiming, etc. According to me, is totally illegal. You cannot certify anything. What you sign is a declaration shown to you. You are not supposed to give him a character certificate that I have verified and he is right, or he has rightly taken credit, or he has rightly taken the correct classification as Sagar pointed out, or he has rightly paid the tax. No. It is merely a certification of what he has shown me, whether reconciliation, this tallies with this or no. That's it. Period. Please do not be worried about this. If anybody issues any letter, summons, etc. to you, please point it out to me.
This is very
Entire
important.
fraternity, I am saying this, I am walking and talking for the entire fraternity, sir. Please don't let this happen to you. Because if it happens to one of you, it is going to happen tomorrow to all of you. Please note, please stand united. One notice was issued to a lawyer, we got stay from the High Court. All of us stood together. I told the High Court what is going on. For some past income tax thing, something. I told the High Court what is going on. It cannot happen. Okay. Please don't let this happen. Okay. So
I've been told there are around 60 arrests of CAs. 60.
So I think this is a very different debate. We have someone very senior like Atul Beda here from the institute, and we have seen this. So suddenly, when I was studying for my CF, and I used to study whether a chartered accountant is a watchdog or a bloodhound, and we only remember the statement to say what it is. But see, over a period of time, I think that entire thing is changing. Good or bad in terms of what it is, the responsibility which is cast on the profession, the way the entire, and it's not about India, it's globally the way people are looking at to say that when it comes to financials, you're like a doctor. To say you need to certify the health of that organization. Now, whichever way to stand by what we are talking, and I totally take Bharat's point. In fact, I'm very happy that as what Bharat is saying in support of the profession is fantastic. But we need to be really wary about what is happening and why the issues are happening. And if you see some of these issues which are there, how GST and how the government has really gone behind understanding data, using data analytics, how they have been able to do. So probably in COVID times, the way government will use technology to do so many things, I think as a profession we will be far behind. The department in the audit now, and which will start far more rigorously than what they are, because they are still finishing the old service tax, excise, VAT matters. They will come to your client with data to say, look, these are the entries you have booked on so and so date, this is what you have done, these are the debit notes, credit notes, whatever, or this is the input that we have done, and according to us, this is what it is, please explain. You have to either accept or you have to fight legally. I don't think you have any other options now. So with this big change, I think if we are not onto that and we have not upped our game to say that we need to look at better in terms of our clients, our transactions, I think it's going to be far more different than what we have done, especially all the practice in CAs or what we have been doing for so many years in the past, where it was like a half-yearly return for service tax and you were submitting data to the department and we see that you were doing the audit. Now it's going to change. So please keep this in mind, and probably yes, we can fight in the court of law to support, but yes, to me it's more of a question of the profession and what is it, the respect that people have for the profession, and I think that's very important that we need to stand by it to really get it to the next level. I think
Just to add what
I have
Sagar
moved
said.
little bit differently, but very emotionally I feel this is something very important for us.
Absolutely. Just to add what Sagar says, recently, maybe a fortnight ago, I was talking to a officer, and he showed me there is some concept called like fraud analytics. Okay, he is named that also something like FR or something. He showed me that you just give me your number and I give him a mobile number. He said like, okay, with your number, so many registrations have taken place. At so many places you are a director. At so many places, and then he asked me about my email ID. I gave him my email ID. With my email ID, he could show me that okay, which all registrations have been taken using my email ID. So your cell number is enough to trace whatever clients you are handling, whichever registrations you would have done, and the connected issues. Like he could show me the entire trail. That you are a director in this company, he has issued invoice to this company, that company has further raised invoice on this company. So he was able to show me the entire trail of the activities. So these are the kind of, which Sagar says, like we are much behind the government in terms of the using the technology. So, and in that context, what Bharat says, makes more sense that we should, and Atul Bhai should once again stand up. So, Sagar, next question is, there is a change in Rule 89 for claiming refund. And now typically the formula says that, okay, for the purpose of claiming refund, what you can do is your export turnover cannot be more than 1.5 times of your local turnover. Now the situation can be like, okay, first of all, I don't have any local turnover at all. So 1.5 of 0 would become 0. That could be the one proposition. Secondly, genuinely, I may have various additional costs when I am doing in the international market. There are freights, etc., etc. There are not many things involved. So obviously, sometimes locally my next door buyer can take it at 100 rupees, which I will be exporting at 160 rupees. How to deal with that 10 rupees current?
So I think, when this provision came last year and it was a big question mark, and just to give a background why this provision is there and why we need to understand, and this is how the department is going to look at that. Let's understand that, and then probably today also the rules or the provisions to actually lay down the process to say how this will be computed, etc. is not there. So we still look at that once it's really rolled out. So we see the intention is to say that, say for instance, I am a manufacturer of say textile. Okay, and typically what happens is that the rate of tax on GST is 5%. I am ending up with inverted duty. I have a lot of services and not able to take credit of the same. So what I do, I also have exports. For the same garment which I am selling in the market for 100, I start saying it is for 400 or 500 or 300. And this is what the government came to know based on the analytics. And this is what the background is. Now what happens is, why am I doing so? I will go for on the exports which I am having where my value is far more higher. I would say export with payment of tax and get the credit of services, capital good, which otherwise I will not get through by way of a refund. I will go through rebate and I will get this money cashed out. Okay, this is what is something where someone saw, someone recommended that this is the way industry, some bad guys, maybe 0.001% who have done it, but this becomes a national issue, and that's how such provision comes. So we see the intention is made in a very different manner, but yes, it would actually have genuine taxpayers being impacted. And honestly, if you see from one side, you are talking of having such a provision where you are trying to restrict it to 1.5 times, and on the other side, you are talking of Make in India, Atmanirbhar Bharat, where you are talking of having more exports, okay, more revenues, more forex, etc. If you see, I don't see that the government is anyway negative to say that you do not have higher exports. It's not saying that you sell locally at a higher rate and outside at a lower rate. No, I don't think that is the intention. I think it is fair to only get those unscrupulous transactions into the net. I don't see beyond that this provision will have any impact. Anything that is genuine and what we are able to explain, and even when the rules are notified to say, and generally whenever we see such provisions, there is always a way to say that in case your value is more than that, then there will be a mechanism basis which you will be able to explain to the adjudicating officer in terms of the valuation why this is there, and you should be able to do that. If such a provision does not happen, then clearly this will be challenged in the court of law to say you can't have an arbitrary provision. You can't determine at what price I am going to sell my goods, especially to unrelated buyer. So to my mind, this is not something which is going to be even used by the government to tax or to not give you the benefit for the purpose of real transaction which is there. And again, to that extent, I don't really see why we have to worry about it. And that is one of the reasons if you see the entire mechanism to deal with it, it's still not fully up.
Okay. So in that context, the way forward would be the challenging this provision, right?
I would still say it's too early for us to do it because if you see the mechanism to deal with it when it is still not out, you are only talking of unless someone, if there is a case for you to say there is a specific case for which it is getting objected, that is the point in time that you need to look at.
So portal is not
In
yet
my mind, it is this provision is still not in effect being even persuaded or done, which is there. And if you have a genuine transition to say your export value is higher, I don't really see. And the example that you gave, my 100% turnover is exports. So there is no question of me saying that there is anything in the domestic market to have a comparison. So in such a case, I would say I'm in a better proposition to say that it's not a question of, if I look at the intent of the provision, there is no way I'm trying to do something incorrect. I'm saying I have a real export market which is there where I'm getting better price and this is normal. There is a question of trying to get worried about that. In my view, I will not look at this provision negatively for any of the real value transactions which are there. I don't think we have to worry about it.
Unless portal follows this, because see, we have got.
See, there is no portal which can do that. Okay, my view again. If you see, what you are trying to say is that GSTN validating your transactions, and in a transaction what happens is, if you see how GSTN is and what are the validations they have, if you see, you can have a HSN validation. You cannot have a product description as a validation. What you are trying to say, if government has to do that, then the product description which is defined on the invoice, if that product description is using for domestic and the same I have used for export, then they'll validate to say what is the price difference, which is the quantity, which is the unit price, and this is total value. So this, to my mind, is not possible, and it never be possible. I mean, for me, if I think government is doing that, someone will only change the product description. You can't track such things, and there is no way, no intent also in my view to do something like that. There will be analytics used to find out what it is, and department may ask you question basis that. But having auto validations to say they'll reject, this will not happen.
Okay. So, Bharat, next question is to you. That ITC, and we have heard a joke that like probably the joke is that if you want to avail an ITC, you have to take the photograph that somebody is delivering goods, and then you have to wear on your neck the GST certificate, and probably then only will be able to get the ITC. They are now asking, after putting so many restrictions that it has to be paid by the supplier, you should have filed return, actually goods should have been received, you should have the invoice, etc. As if these conditions were not enough, they are now saying that even if you have got adequate ITC, you have to pay minimum 1% through cash. Okay, you cannot use 100% ITC, that is one. Secondly, they are saying that even to get that ITC, you need to, that payment by the supplier is not enough. It should get reflected in your 2A or 2B so as to be eligible for that ITC. How far that proposition is applicable, valid, and what would be the way out?
Why this amendment has come?
Because of that 0.0001, maybe some fraudsters, they need cash.
We all give much credit to the government. Okay. A lot of credit. Please let us understand, okay, who makes these amendments?
Bureaucrats.
Bureaucrats. Politicians don't know this. Please don't blame the finance minister. Okay, politicians may not know this. Bureaucrats who are there in that chair for 40, 50 years till they go to their grave. Okay. These amendments are proposed by them. That is where the real problem or the root cause of the problem, according to me, lies. Again, please read the word according to me. Okay. There are so many claims. There are GST frauds in the country. 100 crores, 500 crores, 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, I don't know. इतना पैसा हमारे देश में है वो भी मुझे पता नहीं था. Okay. And they are saying we have recovered 1 lakh crore, 1,20,000 crores, this monthly GST, etc. How they have got this money? By forcefully recovering this input tax credit. Okay. Please don't go by these figures. Please don't go by the numbers. Okay. And let us not here judge anybody's morality. Please, I am not supporting any evaders. I am not supporting any fraudsters. If there are any frauds being committed or evaders are there, they will be dealt according to the law. I am only on the legality. I am only looking at the statute. My only role and my only job is to look at the section. Is there any fraud? Is there any GST fraud being committed in our country? According to me, the answer is an emphatic no. Please, I am making a very bold statement, but a very, very responsible and humble statement. There is not 1 paisa loss to the government. There is no revenue leakage. It may have other implications. You may have other intentions. For a purpose of income tax, you want to disallow your expenses, etc. I am not concerned with that. Or you want to jack up your balance sheet so as to your borrowing capacity becomes better and you can borrow money from the bank, etc. I have absolutely no problem with that. You can take care of that. There are other mechanisms, there are other provisions. As far as GST is concerned, please note, okay, this is a fundamental error that all of us commit. that there are frauds going on. There is no fraud. They say there are no goods and services. Okay. Let us assume they are right. Please note, let us assume they are right, there are no goods, there are no services. Still, can you deny credit to me? Answer is no. Answer is no. For the reason, if you say there are no goods and services, please refund the tax to the person who paid you the money. First. Please refund the money the person paid you tax. You cannot refund it to him because he collected from me. And what I take as credit is nothing but a refund of that tax to me. If you are saying that there are no goods and services, there is not one paisa lost to the government, except, please note, I am putting in a rider here, except in cases this person has not paid tax. Please note, these provisions were introduced earlier under the Maharashtra VAT Act, where the validity was upheld by the Bombay High Court, Justice Chandrachud at the Bombay High Court, in cases where the supplying dealer doesn't pay tax. In that event, the government says, if I have not got money, how will I give you credit? But these conditions are being misconstrued under GST. Please note, GST law is modeled on your VAT laws. It is not, unlike our central excise law, unlike our service tax law, unlike our SENMAT credit rules. Okay, where there is a concept of factory, where there was a concept of depot, where there was a concept of a manufacturer, where there was a concept of a distributor, dealer, first stage dealer, second stage dealer, all have lost significance. Today the section requires receipt of goods and services. It does not talk about physical receipt of goods and services. What 16.2 to whatever that condition is, sir, okay, talks about the legal receipt of the goods and services. Please note, the legal receipt of the goods and services happens when there is a transfer of ownership in the goods and services from the seller to the purchaser. If I have purchased the goods and services, I have paid a price of those goods and services to you, there is a valid contract, and you have paid tax to the government, there can be no denial of credit. However, all of us are assuming receipt means physical receipt. Show me delivery challan, show me lorry receipt, show me what? E-way bill. Okay, E-way bill, not required. It's not required. You may say, sir, ये सब बोलने के लिए अच्छा है, जब वो लोग आते हैं ये सब कोई नहीं सुनते हैं। ये सब बोलने के लिए आप बोल रहे हैं लीगली, वो सब सुनने वाले नहीं है। You are right. You are absolutely right. They are not going to agree with this because their concept is physical receipt. Physical receipt of goods and services. And please note again, I am not supporting any fraudster or evaders. I am not on those transactions. Please note, I am not on those transactions. I am on actual genuine transactions where you are not able to prove physical receipt of the goods. But you have actually paid a price to the supplier and he has actually paid tax to the government, is reflecting your 2A or whatever that form is, sir. And you have taken credit on that basis. In those cases, credit cannot be denied to you. And please note, what they do is, they will ask the supplier also to reverse credit, they will ask you also to reverse the credit, they will ask your buyer also to reverse credit. On the same supply, everybody ends up paying tax. That is why they reach 1,20,000 crores. Now, with this intent in mind, that only and only fraud is going on in the country, these provisions are created. These provisions are enacted only with an intention to check fraud, to keep a tab on evaders, to keep a check on fraudulent transactions, saying we will add or impose one more condition which will ensure if you have complied with all these conditions, then only you will get the credit. But we fail to understand, or we fail to forget that those fraudsters may be 2% of the total, or I do not know. I do not know, sir.
Less than that.
I do not know. 2 or 4 or 5 or I do not know. But we enact a law keeping in mind only 2%. We forget that majority will end up suffering because of this. And this particular provision will be used as a tool of oppression by the revenue against these 98%.
So case, what would be the way forward?
Okay, according to me, this section will not be operative till 43A comes into effect. That is still not put into effect whenever that comes into effect. But this can be a subject matter of challenge. Please note, there cannot be a condition imposed on you that your supplier should file his returns. Your supplier should correctly file his returns. Your supplier should correctly and timely file his returns so that your entry is reflected. Okay. His compliance cannot be put upon you. Okay. The government cannot be like Amitabh Bachchan, जाओ पहले उस आदमी का साइन लेके आओ, तब तुमको क्रेडिट दूंगा. Okay. And identical provision was there under Maharashtra Act, but as I told you, the provision was separate, was different, with a different intent in mind, and Bombay High Court upheld it in Mahalakshmi Cotton. Delhi High Court, Justice Muralidhar, a similar provision under Delhi Act was struck down on the ground of it being invalid for impossibility of performance. It is not in my hands to check his books. Okay. As long as you don't allege, please note, as long as you don't allege that you are party to that fraud, that you know this and then you have done this, that's a different matter. Okay. And in another judgment, of course, that Delhi High Court judgment was upheld by the Supreme Court, but in another judgment, Justice Sikri, I don't remember the name. TVS. Arise was Delhi High Court. Justice Muralidhar, that was upheld by the Supreme Court. There was another judgment by Justice Sikri in TVS, where the provision was upheld saying that you cannot enforce his compliance only, and therefore the validity of this section can be challenged.
So I think I'll add only one thing again, balancing the entire thing. One is the substantive provision, where we are talking about to say look at the intention of the provision. And as far as the fact that you have got the invoice, you have got the goods, the intention is that if you see section 16 and it has multiple conditions and you are fulfilling those conditions, you are, the problem is that probably do not have a document, probably for some e-way bill mistake, you don't have e-way bill, or even whatever non-compliance, the suppliers find a B2C return instead of B2B gets reported. I think these are all procedural issues in my view. This should not deny you the right in terms of claiming the credit. I have seen cases where probably it was the old return, they did not file, we followed up with them as a buyer, they filed the return later, now at 17, 18, 18, 19 and so forth, whatever the reason may be. Once the supplier has paid his tax and he has reported it, whenever it is, to me, I am within my rights to say, look, I have got genuinely all the content I am talking about. If they are fulfilled to that extent substantively, I think I am well within my rights to claim the credit. But just a little bit different from what Bharat is saying is on the point to say receipt of goods for a moment, if I have to take in that condition, to say that this is one of the conditions which is important and this is irrespective of what your supplier's compliances are. This is a different condition to say you have to demonstrate that the goods have been received by you. Then I think whichever way, and I'm not talking it's necessarily an e-way bill or the GRA, you have a physical possession of the goods, you have got it, you will have to substantiate that. And this I'm saying more from your own benefit perspective to say that unless you are not able to substantiate that these are other conditions beyond your, if you see GST, in ITC, I think our entire focus is merely on the two-way PR reconciliation and seeing that supplier return mein kya dikhaya, whether he has filed, paid the tax, etc. But we do miss out on a lot of other things which are equally important when it comes to the other conditions. And again, delivery necessarily does not mean physical delivery, it can be a constructive delivery. So keep these concepts in mind in terms of what it is and the relevant documentation. The only point why I'm telling this is that if you see even in Senmat trade rules, and the Supreme Court said this to say that giving credit or allowing credit is a subject matter of a right of the government which is giving you such a benefit which is there. So it is not something which is like for me a perpetual right to say that, yeah. So I think we have to just balance this and that's the only point I would say.
And a connected question to you, Sagar, with regard to ITC on capital goods. If I am 100% exporter of services, okay, now earlier I had a question, option, like I can export with payment of taxes and claim refund. Now, since there is only one route left, which is only taking refund of input, what about the ITC on capital goods?
So I think this is an important issue when this budget actually tries to plug this entire thing. While they have not notified the class of taxpayers whom they want to allow the rebate route that we generally use the word. There is nothing like rebate in the law, but we say rebate. So you see what they're trying to do is that intentionally the government does not want you to claim trade on capital goods as a refund. This is what the intention is. Now, whether right or not, if you look at the provisions, look at the act, in my view, if you say that the input tax credit as a terminology, if it is used for the purpose of claiming refund, I think the input tax credit is a broader terminology which can cover any of its services, imports, capital goods. Now, look at the intention which is on one side and look at what industry was doing and what you rightfully said. I'm in services, I can go for export with tax and I'm using utilizing credit for the purpose of payment of taxes, which is a valid way to do it. I don't see a problem. Subject to the 96, 10 and 89 restrictions where you're talking about that you are not importing under, you are not an EU HTPI for instance, where there are specific restrictions. Again, whether that needs to be challenged because if I'm importing under EPCG advanced license and not giving IGST benefit, I was allowed to go under limit. For EU, I was not, which is unfair. But having said that, for a moment, if I have to presume that all my imports which are there, if I was always paying my IGST, there was no reason why I should not be allowed to limit. So as a date also, if you ask me for services, I can still do that. Let the amendment come. Let it specify as to why, with the condition to say why you are not allowing me this rebate. And then there is a time for us to say that export, if you see, and this is a laid down principle that you cannot export taxes outside the country. Right? What it means is that if I am a 100% exporter, whatever GST I am going to suffer on my purchases which is there, I should be able to zero rate that. With that principle in mind, if you are going to have something which is going to be a very restrictive condition, not allowing me that, then I think it can be clearly be challenged.
But my next question is about the tenancy rights. If somebody has purchased and also paid GST on that, and then he is providing like some commercial services using those tenanted premises. So will he be allowed to claim ITC?
Yes.
Yeah,
Why that question, sir?
Yeah, because for me, it was
Yeah.
my
So the question was very simple, but now let me allow my time. So the point is, say for example, instead of tenancy rights, if somebody is buying a shop which is under construction and paying GST to the builder, will he be eligible to claim his credit with regard to that? So 17.5.
So, okay, that should have been the question. That should have been the real question. Otherwise, there is no problem. Whether 17.5 bar for claiming credit of tax paid on construction works contract, etc., whether that bar will apply or not. As all of us are aware, the Odisha High Court in Safari Retreat case has read down it. They have upheld the validity of the section, but they have read down the section to say that if you are using it for letting it out, on which you are going to pay tax, then you are eligible for credit. Okay. Similar matter is pending before Bombay High Court. I am arguing that matter, and the Punjab High Court and Andhra High Court. Okay. This section has been challenged. Okay. According to me, independent of the challenge, let us assume the section is valid. Please let us not go and toe my line saying everything is invalid. Okay. Let us assume the section is valid. Then what should be our answer? Okay. According to me, there is a fine line of interpretation there. Okay. Which no court has taken a view on that. Probably Bombay High Court will take when I argue that matter. This way or that way, I do not know how they are going to decide. They may reject it also. But this is what my view is. If you see, the section says on your own account. On own account. Okay. What the section wants to put a cap on is that when you undertake construction on your own account, there you will not get the credit. There you will not get the credit. Okay, but when I was discussing with Jay said, no sir, you are making a mistake, because the section says in the course of furtherance of business also. Okay, in the course of furtherance of business also. So I said, no, don't worry, I have read the section carefully and I am making this statement after reading the section. The section seeks to deny credit or stop the credit to a person, like for example, say a chartered accountant. When I am a businessman, business means profession also. Okay, I provide output services. Suppose I construct an office for myself, which will be used in my chartered accountancy business. There, the section will say that you have constructed on your own account, you will not get credit, mister. But if that construction itself is your business, you will get credit. In other words, if I construct a hotel for letting it out, or I construct a storage or godown for letting it out, where the construction itself is the output supply on which I am going to pay output tax, this bar will not apply. Okay. This is a fine line of interpretation subject to courts taking a view and subject to validity of the section, but in any case, Safari Retreat, the High Court says you are eligible for credit if you are paying output tax on that.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
I will just add one more point and maybe a little different. And I will want Bharat to succeed in this case, which are there, and it will be actually a beneficial for everyone. But if you see the home retail's judgment, Supreme Court judgment, and one of the reason it's still pending in Supreme Court, the High Court at least what it said is that it is not on the construction, it is not about saying that, and the challenge was to say that this is a tax on involved property. And what the court had was to say there is an economic value addition. So when you are saying it's a rental service that you are doing, there is a value addition which is there is a service in that character, and hence it is taxable. So the challenge that we going to have, and I will tell you practically what happens is when you talk of a pure example of saying that you are having a building which is going to be constructed for the purpose of further renting out, the intention to rent, whether it is there from day one or whether it is going to be later on, and it can be a mixed use to say I can construct and part of it can be sold and part of it can be rented, is always going to be a question of facts. So please keep in mind that even today when we try to take this argument saying that this entire credit of construction is going to be finally for the purpose of renting and what is own purpose which will get interpreted, it is still an absolute grey area that we talk about. Humble view again on Safari Retreat, again the judgment which is there in terms of what it's trying to do. I think a lot of gaps still. If you really see from that perspective, see what we're talking about. I think rightfully said that enough argument that we can still put forward to say why we are talking of this. One of the things that department can always argue to say that when the legislature intent was to provide something, they have done it. And the reason why I'm telling this, and I remember my experience discussing this with some very senior officers in the law committee. And the thing is that if you look at real estate as a subject, it's not fully there under the GST. So is the oil and gas for that matter, and so is the power for that matter. Now, what the intention is to say that when you look at this entire ambit to say why today completed construction, okay, units sold after completion, you are saying it's not taxable under GST, right? The primary thing that I'm talking about, which means that when part of it is still not covered under GST, it means that on the input side also, when this entire ambit of it gets, this is where you want to see more parity in the inputs and outputs which are there. Otherwise, even today, there are a lot of taxes which you are paying on your inputs, which are still becoming a cost, which you are not able to get it out of your output. So this gap is still there in terms of what we are talking about. And till the time when you are looking at it in a total holistic manner, you will get the solution. In fact, let me also tell you that a lot of representations which have gone to the government on this, and the government is looking at this favorably to say at least for the industry which is storage, warehousing, retail, where this is direct cost, it should be allowed. This is what, again, is something that we have to wait to see.
Well, the other question with regard to the periodicity of claiming credit. Now, there is a provision in section 16 which says that maximum you can claim up to the September, the date to file, or maybe the date of filing annual return, whichever is earlier. Now the question is say for example, what does that mean? Should I claim it in my return, or even if I book it in my books of accounts, that's enough? Because they are saying about taking the credit. So that's the first question. Actually, the another question which is as per this questionnaire is this: that the supplier has filed return after September. In that case, though I have booked in my books of accounts, but 2A was not reflecting, and therefore I couldn't claim. So in both these scenarios, what would be the answer?
This is basically, I think, relating to section 16(4) conditions. That they have put a condition of time limit. Okay. This section will be challenged about time limit. Okay. This was negated by the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court has taken a view saying that no, the section is valid. Of course, under 140. Please note, the Bombay High Court was considering a challenge under section 140, where they put a time limit of 1 year for taking that credit. That was repelled. The Gujarat High Court took a different view, saying that no, this condition is bad, because they are trying to impose a particular condition on a vested right of credit which is already approved to you. Okay, and that matter is pending in the Supreme Court. I am arguing in the case of Rolls-Royce. Okay, that matter is pending in the Supreme Court because the High Court and both the High Courts have taken a contrary. Be that as it may, that was in the context of an approved right to you. Whether a right is approved to you or no is a different matter. Whether Article 300A will apply or no is a different matter. First and foremost, let us all remember one thing. Senvat credit, okay, sorry, now input tax, we are used to Senvat credit. Input tax credit is not your birthright. It is not your fundamental right. It is not a right which flows from part 3 of the Constitution. It is a statutory right. Please note, we did not have this concept of Senvat, input tax, etc. till as late as 2000. We are a developing nation. Please note, we are seeing development. And just the way we are seeing development, the law is also seeing development. We must all realize that. Prior to 86, there was no credit. Everything was taxed. 86, they introduced the concept of pro forma credit. Some nominal credit was being allowed on few items. Then they came up with the concept of mod VAT credit. Mod VAT credit also was one-to-one correlation. Only if you are a manufacturer of fabric, etc., or cloth, garment, etc., they were giving you credit. Then they introduced the concept of Senvat credit, only for specified goods. Many goods were still out of the Senvat scheme. Then they introduced service tax law where they merged the Senvat credit rules as late as 2004. There also they may not give credit for everything. So please note, and today also, though they are saying there is seamless credit, etc., seems very less credit, okay. But it is their prerogative. You cannot claim it as a matter of right. Suppose tomorrow the government takes a call that I will delete section 16. There is only one section in the act. There is no other section in the act. Suppose I take a call, I will delete it. Can you challenge it? Answer is no, according to me. You cannot challenge it, saying that no, you have to give me credit. Who told you? Who told you have to give me credit? What I am trying to argue is, okay, that's probably I wanted to clarify to Sagar's first question because he was saying that you want to challenge everything. I am not saying that. My point is, the conditions. 1, 2, whether the condition for availing credit is valid or no. Whether it meets the requirements of Article 14 and Article 19 or no. That is the limited challenge. If I fail in that, then it is valid. Okay. And please note, if the government intends to give you a right, please note it's a statutory right. The government is well within its power to impose any conditions they want. Okay. Just like right of appeal is not your birthright. Therefore, you cannot challenge that they are putting condition of deposit. No, if they are giving a right of appeal, they can put it with some conditions. If the condition is so onerous that your right is defeated, then you can challenge it. If the condition is so onerous that your very right gets defeated, then you can challenge it. Okay. Having said that, now the question seems to be that there is a time limit. Okay. Please note, time limit is valid. According to me, I don't see any illegality in the time limit that they are giving you September of the next month, next year or something. So they are giving you 1.5 years time to book your, which is reasonable, please. Okay, to book your invoices, etc. relating to that particular financial year. Okay, if I don't do that, or if my supplier files delayed return, I don't see a challenge there because from the day he files his return, it will be shown in your 2A. From that day, you can take credit. The other question which seems to be is the question of taking credit.
So his question, if you see, is that
the real question is books vis-a-vis return. Books vis-a-vis return. Section 16 talks about taking credit. Taking credit where it is not said. So if I booked in my books, but it is not shown in my returns, can I claim it saying that I had taken the credit? I had taken the credit. Okay. There can be two lines again, two views. Okay. According to me, one view can be yes, answer is yes. You can argue that the moment you take it in your books, in your financials, in your books of accounts, it is as good as taken. The other view could be saying that no, section 616 talks about your electronic credit ledger. And the section talks about as may be prescribed by the rules. So unless it is shown in your return, it will not come to your electronic credit ledger. Therefore, according to the revenue, they will say, we are not concerned with your taking in your books, etc. We are only concerned whether you have shown it in your return or no. If you have not shown it in your return, it will not come to your electronic credit ledger and therefore your right is gone. Accordingly, it's a debatable point. You can argue that the moment you take it in your books of accounts, the credit has been booked, the credit has been taken, whether it is reflected in the return or no. But the difficulty, the challenge that you will face is, please note, you will say that you are saying this, but practically when I put in the computer, okay, because we are all pro digitization, no? I am also not against digitization. But let us not forget, these days, system is controlling the law. The GST system controls the law doesn't control the system. Okay, so the law may say anything. You may say, sir, whatever you want to say, you say. But system is not allowing me. That is a challenge that you are going to face.
Yeah. So, Bharat, a connected question, like, see, while introducing GST, the promise was given that it will be seamless credit, etc., etc. Can there be a ground to say that there is something called promissory estoppel? That based on this ground only, you make us run in the months of May, June, 17, etc., and then you implement it in a hustle-bustle manner. So now it's your duty that you ensure that it is seamless and you don't put this kind of hurdles. Is that an arguable point?
No. They never give you any commitment, sir. आपने गलत समझा, हम क्या करें? आप कुछ भी समझ लेंगे. Did they give you any official communication in writing saying that I will give you credit without any condition? No. The concept of promissory estoppel, please note, is a concept evolved by the courts. It is based on a principle of equality. It's a principle of equity, where the maker of the promise should not go back on his promise. This principle will apply only in cases where the government made a promise to you in writing that I will do this, you please come, take the credit, and then it is taken back. That is where the concept of vested right will come. That is why I said, I made a clear disclaimer at the outset itself. Section 140 judgments will be different, please note, from 16. Section 140, there was certain accrued rights. There we can have a debate whether it is an indefeasible right or no. Some people may have said no, it is not an indefeasible right. Some people may say it is. That you may have different view. But here we are talking about section 16 under the new law. Here there is no promise as such made by the government. Okay. And please note, according to them, they will come to the court and say, yes, we have stuck to our promise, we have given so much credit which was earlier not available. This is what we meant by seamless credit. So this cannot be challenged on that ground according to me.
Let me add a couple of points. One is at least my view on the books which have been written. I think I would straight go to say it should be in the written. To try and dispute to say I have taken the credit in the books. If you look at the GST law and section 16 read with the rules, you are talking of the conditions which are there for you to avail the credit. So unless you have not availed the credit with the return and guide just upon section 16 again, which talks of in the return, I don't think it's going to be something which you can do by saying I have taken the books. So that's at least my view which we have to look at. The second thing on estoppel, and it just reminds me of a number of cases where private parties have taken the government to the courts on the grounds of promissory estoppel, and more often than not, courts have said that promissory estoppel will not apply to governments, especially in cases where the changes have been done in lines with a larger public interest. And the cases have been various to say that incentives were promised and suddenly they were stopped, there were MOUs made, they were done, but over a period of time they couldn't do it and they withdrawn the benefit, etc. And courts have still held that. So again, to my mind, Selvat, the ITC 2 in section 16 itself cannot come into promissory estoppel so as to say. But having said that, also to succeed on these grounds, again for credit, which is again what Bharat rightfully used the word, which was loss for funding out, to say it's not your accrued or vested right. It is something that the government is giving you as a benefit. It's like, someone gives you a gift and saying, "Arey, ye kya gift de diya, aise acha de de." And you can't really say that. That's the point.
So with these retrospective amendments coming into play, like treating 3B as a return, which was not a return, which was a return, and like all that stuff, retrospective amendments. In those cases, can you say that, like, how can you expect me to be an astrologer and forecast that, okay, these are going to be some changes in the future which will be retrospective in nature. So whatever steps I have taken, maybe I have availed credits or whatever I have done. So will that promissory estoppel concept would come into play in those kind of cases?
Again, sorry, answer is no. Retrospective amendment is their right, legislative right recognized by the courts that the legislature has power for retrospective amendments. Okay. Here his question seems to be, I could not have visualized that you will come with retrospective amendment. Okay. I could not have visualized that you will come with retrospective amendment. Therefore, you clearly know that there was a lacuna in the law, or you clearly know that there was something amiss, which you have supplied or supplanted now, which is fair, which is within your rights. Okay. These arguments can be only taken for contesting interest and penalty demands, not for the tax. Not for the tax. According to me, you cannot say that you cannot recover retrospective tax from me.
In fact, one issue, Bharat, I think you can answer this. The issue that comes up is say take a genuine case where say I felt that my product is exempt. I did not pay tax. And later on, after some investigation audit, I was told, I went to the consultant, I was told, no, you have to pay tax, maybe 5% rate. Now I suddenly come to know that for the last 5 years I have to end up paying tax. Now at that time, because I felt that I don't have a taxable revenue, I don't have an output tax, I never claimed input tax. I could have done that. But now I believe that there is a 100 rupee tax payable, but if I take the credit for the last 5 years, it could be at least 80 rupees, my net liability is 20. Now suddenly I am in a jeopardy because on output I am going to pay 100 rupees of tax. And I can't claim ITC because I have not filed returns, the return I have not claimed, I have not done anything, that time limit is gone. And this is a case of genuine hardship which probably I can look at to say that okay, this is something that if under the, and again, whether ignorance of law is an excuse, and these are the questions will come up. If you see under Senmat credit rules again, if you go back, earlier there was no restriction, no time limit to claim the credit for the earlier period as well, and it was unlike today's everything electronic which is there. Where even in investigation, it was cases found out to say there was a tax, but you could prove this is my credit and you could say this is my net tax liability. Which unfortunately in GST is going to be extremely difficult basis the condition which is there. The only point which I am asking that these are the cases which we are seeing coming up and which are going to come up for whatever reasons, and we have seen this happening to say that some old case, today you get an award, the payment was in arbitration, so that 180 days condition I was not fulfilling, I had not claimed the credit, so pre-GST, the case got settled now, and I am actually seeing this case to say that the invoice of 17, but the case got settled now, and now I am paying the invoice value, can I claim the credit? And these are going to be real genuine problems.
Sir,
Only the court will help you, sir. Only the court can help you.
yeah, sir, next question is to you, Sagar, a little bit, now let's take a little different flavor. It's about the registration. So there is a GTA which is providing services from Maharashtra, and they have got some depots in Gujarat as well. Now the consignment notes are being issued from the Gujarat, but they have the main head office, all the heads sitting over here in Maharashtra. So the question is it necessary that since I have got a depot in Gujarat, I am compulsorily liable to take a registration in Gujarat? Or can I say that entire set of decisions or the business activities happen from Maharashtra, therefore I will have only one registration in Maharashtra?
So I think what you need to see, there are two different things that we are talking about. One is, what is the place of business? Okay, and if you go to the definition of place of business, which is very wide, which includes a fixed establishment or whichever place the ordinary course of business that you are using as a place of your business, this becomes a place which is your place of business from your conducting of business. You are calling it your own depot, goods are going to be there, and so on and so forth. So I think in the ordinary case which you are looking at, if you are conducting your business from there, and there are many companies who do this to say, I may have depots, sales office all over the country, but my invoicing still happens from my central office, and this is in GST, there should not be an issue about this. The question that you need to see that from a place of supply perspective, are we seeing anything which is specific to that state, which happens, and hence you are going to require that. Now, if you see provisions in relation to ITC for that matter, when there is you are saying there is a depot, so there is a renting invoice that you are going to receive for the depot, on which there is going to be a C+S charge. It is in your own interest to look at to say the minute you register, this is going to fulfill the entire ambit of input and output for you to ensure that this is there. So typically, whenever and I have seen advance billing on this same issues, where they have also had to say it's not required for such things. But if you see many industries like auto, for instance, where you're looking at a third-party logistics, typically what happens is that you have a different location, or a just-in-time you're putting the inventory there for some time, and then it goes to the OEM which is there. In all such cases, because of the fact that you consider that as a place of business, and the fact that you are using that for the purpose of doing doing that. In my view, as far as registration provision is going, I'm not going to anything. I think registration should be taken.
Any different view?
No, no, absolutely. Why renting? होटल में जाते हो उधर.
Whatever.
हाँ. Your credits, registration is for your credit. Please take registrations, please take credit, pass it on to your head office or wherever you want to do it.
But forgetting about the pragmatic portion of that, say for example, it's not making commercially sense that okay, the cost of compliance will be sometimes maybe more than the credits. In such a cases, what could be the legal view? Is it necessary to take registration or not?
But why you feel it is not place of business? If you're asking the question, I am countered.
So, first of all, like connected with the place of business, there is another concept, location of the supplier. Okay, the supplier location is there where from he is supplying the services. So, which could be like, one can argue that it is Maharashtra, not Gujarat. So, I am executing from Gujarat because the one more point of argument that a lawyer would be arguing in different courts. He'll be performing services from.
What is that?
It's a different, it's a, so don't take one.
So, take an example of Sagar. So he has to go for audits, and then he'll be like stationed for a few days, few weeks together.
That does not create a fixed establishment there. See, the point is, and I tell you, this entire concept of fixed establishment, base, PE, if you see some of the wording in the definition also, look at the service tax law, look at the DTAs which are there, everywhere this has always been a question of dispute to say that can a agent's place can be said to be your PE for that matter, and all the discussions are there, and we have OECD commentaries and huge things which are there on this, which are there. In my view, if you are looking at the intention to say, I going and arguing and saying in a hotel for few days does not create a fixed establishment, as compared to a case where probably I go and stay there 6 months in a year continuously, and that I use the business center of the hotel for a very long period of time in terms of what it is. It is more by your own content to say that what is the context why you are using that place. But you can't say that I am merely because the HO is here and I'm billing from here, this becomes my place of business. That is still my additional place of business. My goods are stored there, they are moving from there. So I think whether it's from insurance, labor, everything that you're going to do, you're going to register that premises. So I don't see why you should say you should. Unless you have the genuine reason and you really charge so much to the GTA that JS's fee is so high that you cannot take a registration there.
So, but that scenario is yet to happen. Sir, like when we were discussing about two differing High Court judgments, and you said in case of Rolls-Royce that you have referred to the Supreme Court. Now, and Supreme Court takes its own sweet time to deliver a judgment. Now, in that scenario, what would be a case? Because that's another point which is coming up. But since like we are running out of time, so I'm taking up that question as of now. Let's say, for example, there are two contradictory judgments. One is of, say, for example, Gujarat High Court, the another one is of Goa High Court. And I am in Maharashtra. That's one scenario. And there could be a scenario where like there is only one High Court judgment. Now in that scenario, what should be taken and what should be made applicable? First case, two differing judgments, two differing High Courts, which are not judicial.
Which are, I am in third. So therefore question, if I have understood correctly, seems to be that one High Court has said yes, another High Court says no. I am in a third state, therefore what do I do? That seems to be the question. Wait till Supreme Court decides. Okay. As a practical answer, please note, don't give up on your claims. Irrespective of what one High Court is saying, please don't give up on your claims, because if you don't lodge a claim, don't keep your claims alive, you will not get the benefit of a favorable judgment, if at all. If at all the Supreme Court rules in your favor, you will not be entitled for the benefit of that favorable judgment. Each man has to fight his own cause. I am not going to fight for you. Okay. Everybody feels, अरे एक आदमी petition file कर दिया तो हम सब गंगा नहा लेंगे. ऐसे नहीं होता सर. Okay. Please, that judgment will be applicable for that petitioner, to that man who has fought for his own cause. He may succeed, he may fail. But even if he succeeds, you may fail. Okay. So please keep your claims alive, whether it is regarding taxability, whether it is regarding refunds, or whether it is regarding input tax credit. Please keep your claims alive, so that tomorrow if there is a favorable judgment, you can the benefit of the judgment can inure to you also. That is one. Two, what happens in such a case when I am in a third state? You can rely on a judgment which is in your favor. Okay. Revenue is not going to agree. They will rely on a judgment which is in their favor. Okay. Ultimately, the High Court of that state has to take a view. And please note, a judgment of one High Court is not binding on another High Court. Okay. It may have persuasive value, it may have value, but it is not binding. Therefore, one High Court can take a view contrary to another High Court. That is one. Two, however, there is another principle that if one High Court of the country has struck down one particular provision which is unconstitutional, please note, which is ultra vires, other High Court, especially in case of a central statute, we are only talking about central statutes, we are not about VAT laws. Especially in case of central statute, another High Court, by virtue of Justice Sinha's judgment in Kusumingats, is bound to follow that. It cannot be a situation there that one particular provision doesn't apply for the same dealer in state A and it will apply for the same dealer in state B. That situation should not happen, and therefore the second High Court or the other High Court should follow that judgment and hold that the provision will not apply. However, this principle does not apply if assuming High Court A upholds the validity. If I assume High Court A upholds the validity of a particular provision, then High Court B in B state B is entitled to strike it down. You cannot say once it is upheld, it is upheld. Obviously it is valid. Till the time it is struck down, it is valid. High Court can take a view, but the reverse is not true.
And in fact, also the Bombay High Court judgment, if I remember at Thane Electric, where they held to say that the judgment which comes later and it comes off,
But that is of the same court.
of the same court. That also helps to say that actually what happens in this like unicorn which came post by the auto, so the larger bench which is the later judgment should be.
Yeah. Sagar, so another question to you. That's RCM on your foreign agents. So say for example, that is obviously liable to be paid. But there are certain expenditure incurred by the agent, which is like on pure agent basis, neck to neck basis. He has got all the support. In such cases, should you include that value also while discharging your GST liability?
No, I think the principle of agency fairly there, and especially in terms of all the CHs and freight forwarders, what we do is that there are multiple expenses which are there, which are made on behalf. I think the invoices are also on behalf. So I don't really see an issue there, and neither I see department anymore contending. There were a lot of disputes for the earlier period on cargo handling service. They used to get it all together and issue notices. But I think in GST also, foreign agent incurring expenses that actually was pure investment. I don't see really an issue.
Okay.
Then any specific reason you are asking, or?
No, see the question was that while discharging my liability, should I incur those elements also while discharging my liability?
No, I think section 15 will still apply there as well. I am still looking at the valuation to say that if it is a pure agency that I am looking at, I think it will value.
Okay.
But sir, the very expense will be taxable expense. There won't be the very third party discharging my liability. That expense is taxable expense.
So no, his question was for it is a foreign agent and expenses incurred there.
Agreed.
Okay.
That expense is like a taxable under reverse charge.
So that's the point. To say that what becomes taxable. So I'll tell you one more thing. The foreign agency's consideration which is there. Say for instance, you have an Indian agent, you have a foreign agent, and the foreign agent is paid for that. Now you see, because of the provision of intermediary, what happens is his location becomes a taxable location. Because of that, the fact that he is providing services here should not become taxable at all.
Okay, sir, let me reframe for on his behalf. So I have got a lot of liability on reverse charge basis. Okay, normally software licenses, these, that, whatever. So I'm appointing an agent over there. So I've got 10 crores ka liability. Say for example, I have to make payments, which normally I was supposed to pay under reverse charge. So I'm an appointing agent for 1 lakh rupees, and I'm asking you to incur on my behalf. So I will pay on you that 1 lakh rupees and not on that 10 crores.
No, I think this is a different thing you are talking about. If that, see, if you're giving an example of software license, you have to understand that if it is a software license provided by say Microsoft Singapore, they will have to give the license in your name, which is an entity in India. Even if you buy through agents, and Microsoft does have different companies who are there, distributors which are there. Now, what will happen in such cases? You are still buying those licenses in India. So there is no question of saying that the payment that I am making is a reimbursement per se. What you are talking about is two different transactions. You are saying there's a license fee that I am paying to Microsoft, which is one, and there's an agency commission that you are paying to someone else. So you have to look at the transaction in that manner to say what are you trying to do. If you are going to just mix it together to say it is pure agency, so what we are talking about is the agency commission. You talk of an intermediate loan, and if you look at the education guide which had come in 2012, And there were some very nice examples which I had given, like the case of freight forwarders, pure agency which are there. To say that when you look at this, you look at the agency and the agency commission which are there. When you are talking about cost which is being incurred, and I think that was his question to say that you are making payment of expenses to that party, which is your expense. You have to look at that in that manner.
So the question.
We are interposing an agent or there will not.
It will not. So that planning, I don't see that's what.
You are eligible for credit or no, sir?
Yeah.
Wherever you are eligible for credit, please don't get into this dispute. Pay and take credit. This must be a cash flow issue. I agree.
His concern could be 50% credit.
I understand, sir.
50% cash.
I don't see that planning.
Yeah, it should not.
Yes.
Yes.
You tell him, he tells stop, we are going to get a problem.
Yeah.
Of the issues, important issues.
Okay. Fine. So we'll take up questions, maybe like floor questions later on. So we have got Balbhai only to catch.
Yes, yes.
Tax has been paid maybe by DRC 03, but then the DRC 04, which is like a conclusive kind of a statement which comes from the officer, that has not come. So what could be the because
Sir, there is no time limit for issuing any form. Please note, if there is no time limit in the statute, you cannot interpose a time limit. If the statute does not provide for any time limit, you cannot interpose any time limit. Citadel Pharma Supreme Court says that. Okay. However, if there is no time limit, can it be endless? Answer is no. Any and every activity has to be done within a reasonable period of time. Now, what is reasonable period of time will depend on the facts of each case. It will vary from fact to fact. So 6 months may be reasonable for you, 6 days may be reasonable for me. Okay. When you pay tax under GRC 03, etc., and you're supposed to issue 04, etc., and it doesn't do that within a fortnight or so, you can write a letter to them saying that if you have not rejected or not issued, it will be construed as deemed to be accepted. Okay. And under the earlier sales tax law, the High Court took a view where you apply for registration. When you apply for registration and they don't grant you registration within a period of 30 days, it is deemed to be granted. Something which is not specifically rejected is deemed to be accepted. Okay, that principle will apply.
Sir, if ITC wouldn't have been